Hello, welcome. My name is Katina Horton, and this is my presentation for the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, their official statement on food insecurity in the United States. So I want to start by talking about what is food security, because really to understand food insecurity, we have to understand the other, especially because the terms are often sort of used interchangeably. But the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics defines food security for a household as access by all members at all times to enough food for an active and healthy life. So conversely, when we're talking about food insecurity, that's going to mean the limited or uncertain availability of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, or limited or uncertain availability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways. And the very last part of that statement, I want to just kind of have you put in the back of your mind, because I'm going to touch on something a little later when we talk about work environments, where that's going to come back into play and be important. But I want to talk about quickly the four levels of food security as defined by the USDA. And it starts off as high food security. And that's going to be where a household has no problems or worries regarding consistent access to adequate food. Then we drop down a level to marginal food security, which is where a household may have some problems or anxiety about accessing adequate food, but the quality of food, the variety, and the quantity of food that they eat is not substantially reduced. Then we drop down another tier to low food security. And this is where a household reduces the quality, variety, and nutritional value of food within their diet, but the quantity or their normal eating patterns are not disrupted. And then we drop down to the bottom tier, which is very low food security. And that is when, at times during a fiscal year, eating patterns for one or more members of the household or food intake is disrupted because of either financial struggles, reduced resources, or access to food. And there's a very distinct difference between food insecurity and hunger, because hunger is more of a physiological response that leads to discomfort, and not all people who are food insecure are hungry. And I want to take a second to read to you a quote from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United States, because I best think it sums up the difference. And they said on their website, quote, "While many people may not be hungry in the sense that they are suffering physical discomfort caused by a severe lack of dietary energy, they may still be food insecure. They might have access to foods that meet their energy requirements, yet are uncertain that it will last, or they may be forced to reduce the quality and or quantity of the food they eat in order to get by." Is now, according to Feeding America, which is a great nonprofit organization that I'll speak about a little bit later in this presentation, 84% of households say they serve report buying the cheapest food instead of healthy food in order to provide their families with enough to eat, which also, again, is a little bit of how there's a difference between food insecurity and hunger. So in that regard, you may not be hungry, but you may not be eating the most nutritional food. So someone may eat a bag of potato chips and a cola for dinner because that makes them feel full. Or a mother of four may have to water down her skim milk so that her children can all have cereal in the morning. That's really the primary difference between food security and hunger. So, what are factors that contribute to food insecurity? Certainly, as we've seen definitely in the last year and a half since the start of the pandemic, limited resources, underemployment, unemployment, and high housing costs can definitely contribute to food insecurity. But there are also factors such as inflation, food prices, increased household expenses, or stressful events, something like the addition of a new child in the family, or the car breaking down, or maybe grandma or granddad has to move in. All of those factors can definitely intensify food insecurity within a household. So, looking at the statistical data, especially as we do speak about the pandemic, according to the Academy's position paper, when we look at the years between 2008 and 2011, food insecurity rates spiked during that recession at a rate of 14.9% of American households. Then we saw a slight decline in 2016 with 12.3% of all US households. It's approximately 15.6 million households experiencing some level of food insecurity. So on all four of those tiers during the calendar year. Then in 2008 or 18, sorry, we saw an estimated 1 in 9 Americans, feeling some level of food insecurity, which equated to over 39 million people, including more than 11 million children. Now we enter 2020, where we had 38.3 million Americans that lived in food insecure households identified as low food insecurity. So I think that's an important difference, because when we look at 2018, we're just talking about 37 million people in general on all four tiers. Now in 2020, we've got 38.3 million people just identifying on that very bottom tier. And that in that statistic includes 6.1 million children who lived in food insecure households, along with adults who identified as food insecure, and 9.4 million adults lived in households with very low food insecurity in 2020. So who does food insecurity affect? Well, as we talked about in the last slide, it definitely affects children. As we know, nutrition for proper development, brain development, just general function is super important, especially in children. And during the pandemic, because of the pandemic, 13 million children, that's almost 1 in every 6 children, now may experience some level of food insecurity. That statistic coming from Feeding America. And the next couple of statistics I'm going to talk about on these next few slides are provided through the Feeding America website as well. So also affected by food insecurity is communities of color, especially Black and Latino communities. Due to the pandemic, food insecurity in the Black communities increased. Almost an estimated 24% of the Black community experienced food insecurity in 2020, while food insecurity among Latinos rose from 16% in 2019 to more than 19% in 2020. So thusly, when we look at those statistics, Black children are almost 3 times more likely to be food insecure than their white counterparts, whereas Latino children are more than twice as likely to live in food insecure households as white children. And something I found really super interesting when I was looking at this information and statistics were how the impact factors of the pandemic affected the workforce and how that also affected the Black and Latino communities. Statistically speaking, Black people, especially Black women, are more likely to be essential frontline workers and more likely to work in industries that were the hardest hit by the pandemic. And specifically moving to the Latino communities, especially Latinas, they are more than likely to be employed in leisure and hospitality industries. And as we know, those industries were sort of devastated by the coronavirus pandemic. So workers in those industries still continue to face some of the highest unemployment rates in the country right now. Moving just a little bit beyond, while seniors aren't as affected as other demographics, they certainly are affected by food insecurity. In 2019, you had 5.2 million seniors age 60 over. That's 1 in 14 seniors, or 7% of all seniors in America, face some level of food insecurity. 63% of seniors that visited food banks say that they had to choose between food and medical care. And another statistic I found very staggering is that while millions of seniors qualify for monthly grocery assistance through the SNAP program, which I'll also talk a little bit about more later, only 42% of them actually receive benefits from the program. When we talk about other communities that are affected by food insecurity, we can also look at rural communities as well as metropolitan and urban areas. Now, technically speaking, poverty is generally higher in rural communities than it is in urban areas. You have 13% of all people who live in rural areas are more than likely to live below the poverty line, which is comparison to 10% of people in urban communities. But both face their own unique challenges. In rural communities, people often have a lack of transportation to get to stores. The nearest grocery store, food pantry, or food bank may be hours away. They tend to have, live in more concentrated low-wage areas and also have higher rates of unemployment. And 86% of the counties that have the highest percentage of children at risk for food insecurity actually are in rural areas. So some factors that contribute to food insecurity. Number one, we're going to lead with households who have children headed by a single female are 27% more likely to be food insecure. Households headed by a Black non-Hispanic are 19% more likely. Households headed by Hispanic are 16% more likely. And then households with children or those living in rural areas are 13% more likely, while those living in larger metropolitan urban areas are 12% more likely. So, how does all of that information affect work environments and team members? And while I won't go through this list, completely, I do want to touch base on some really important areas where you might come into contact with individuals who are food insecure. Certainly, hospitals and medical offices where physicians, nurses, physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, even intake staff, dietary aides, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, all of those individuals definitely have an opportunity to be on the lookout for someone who may be presenting as food insecure by just simply asking the right questions. Schools and after school programs, teachers, counselors, cafeteria staff, resource officers, volunteers, teacher aides, even other parents of friends of their children may encounter somebody who is food insecure. We also see, people who are food insecure, obviously in food and nutrition programs, in their involvement in community centers or unemployment services. Also, sometimes people who are going through treatment for rehabilitation for drug or alcohol abuse will certainly present as food insecure. But a segment of employers and workforce that I don't think we talk about a lot when we talk about food insecurity, who are people who really do encounter people who are food insecure, are grocery stores, retailers, and restaurants. And I told you earlier to remember about how, food insecurity can also mean about getting food in unacceptable ways. And, when we look at shoplifting or, people maybe not ringing something up in the self checkout aisle, or a mom of four who may be upset that the great deal that she came into the store to get is no longer available. A lot of those people could be food insecure, and that's the only way that they have to provide for their families. So it's definitely something that even in those environments, people really need to take a look at and just be mindful of. So, what are the consequences of food insecurity? So, individuals who live in food insecure households often develop poor eating habits that are inadequate in specific foods and nutrients, and they do not always meet the recommended dietary guidelines for Americans as set out by the FDA. The consequences of food insecurity are going to be things that include both nutritional and non-nutritional issues, which could include, but aren't limited to, substandard academic performance in children, even in college students, inadequate intake of essential nutrients, increased risk of chronic illness, and poor cognitive and psychological functions, including poor mental health. And a chart that I found really fascinating, which I gathered from the Food Research and Action Center, is this here, which shows the impact of poverty, food insecurity, and poor nutrition kind of across the board. And one that really caught my attention that I would have never thought of, right at the top of the list for all three, is asthma. And top of the list being these are alphabetical order, but I found that to be very interesting. We also think of, again, when you equate food insecurity and hunger, they're very different. We don't always think of somebody who may be food insecure as being obese, but when someone's food insecure, they could be eating food that is higher in sugar, higher in sodium, not as nutritionally adequate, maybe over consuming calories because they're consuming more of a food to feel full. So those things can lead to obesity, poor mental health, dental issues, stomach aches, headaches. So a lot of different things that can present as a whole host of other physical problems that really could just be all based back on nutrition. So, thusly, because of food insecurity, since it can lead to chronic disease, there are definite clear implications between food insecure households, healthcare utilization, and associated health costs, which is, again, another consequence of food insecurity. So based on all of that information, it is the general recommendation of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that solutions should include providing food insecure households with nutritional food, nutrition education, and addressing the underlying causes of food insecurity. So there are definitely programs and resources already available that are vital in bridging that fiscal gap that are associated with short-term food insecurity. And while these programs and initiatives are imperative to maintain the integrity of these programs and resources, they cannot be the only response that we have to the issue of food insecurity. And a long-term, systematic, broad-based approach is needed to prevent and eliminate food insecurity effectively. So I want to talk about some of these programs just very briefly that currently work to combat food insecurity. On a federal level, we have SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which provides timely, targeted, and temporary benefits to low-income Americans to buy groceries. You have the Emergency Food Assistance Program, also Women, Infant, and Children, which provides nutritious food and nutrition education for low-income, at-risk women, children, and infants. And you also have the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, which is a program that provides food assistance for low-income seniors with a monthly package of healthy USDA commodities. You have the National School Lunch Program, as well as the Summer Food Service Program, and both of those provide nutritionally balanced lunches, as well as free meals and snacks to low-income children during different times of the year. We also should, I want to take a minute to talk about some of the great charities and organizations that are currently working to combat food insecurity. Feeding America, who I received some of my statistical data on or from, is an organization that takes nutritious food before it goes to waste from retailers, manufacturers, and farmers and gives it to people in need. I think that the Food Bank of New York City, which is one of the largest food banks in the country, deserves a little recognition. They increase access to affordable, nutritious food for New Yorkers that struggle with food insecurity. Their initiatives focus not only on food sourcing and distribution, but nutrition and health education as well, financial empowerment, disaster relief, and research. No Kid Hungry, which is they devise ways to feed the hungry youth of America, including school breakfasts, summer meals, and after school meals. They also go a little bit further and teaching kids and children food skills and educating them about food. They also are involved in research and policy, as well as working with government officials. A lot of people recognize Meals on Wheels as a program which delivers meals to individuals at home who are unable to purchase or prepare their own meals. And then very close to my heart is the Milligan's Food Pantry that is located on the campus of SUNY Buffalo State. And they are committed to assisting the 1 in 5 college students in America who experience food insecurity by offering healthier food pantry options available directly on a college campus. So what does that bring us to with the role of the RD and the RDN and the DTR in regards to food security? The first thing is that they are vital to public education, household and individual screening, increasing awareness about food insecurity in the public sector, and providing nutrition care to those who are directly affected by food insecurity. And RDs and RDNs can do this by collecting, analyzing, and disseminating the data that's associated with food insecurity, as well as analyzing the effectiveness of the programs designed to eliminate food insecurity and giving proper feedback to make sure those programs are working the most effectively and efficiently. And RDs and RDNs should also support legislation about public policy that promote equal, adequate food access, nutrition education, and programs that support the economic stability of individuals, families, and so that leaves us to additional resources. Professionals who want more information can visit the USDA website, the Office for Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, or Feeding America websites for more information on food security. And I've listed here at the bottom some of the sources that I used on some of the statistical data that I've provided throughout the presentation. So that concludes my presentation on food insecurity. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.